Awesome. And you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Cool. Hey everyone, welcome to Leveling Up. We're going to be talking about how to kind of up level as a maker or a manager in the engineering domain. So today we have Jessica Sahagian and Zack Zullick with us. So I think we can start off by having everyone give some introductions. Jessica, you want to kick us off?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Reet. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessa Hagian, as Reet mentioned, and I am the Director of Engineering at ConnectRN, which is a healthcare tech startup in Boston.
Awesome.
Hey everyone.
Zack?
Sure. Hey everyone, it's Zach. I currently am the CEO of a small startup called Praise, which is a sort of bootstrapped solopreneur adventure that I've taken on. Prior to that, I co-founded a startup called Alma in the developer incident management space. Prior to that, I worked as a director of engineering at DraftKings.
Awesome. And my name's Reeth. I'm going to be the moderator today. I've been working as an engineer for about 4 years across a variety of like startups and some larger enterprises. Cool. So to kick things off, I want to just have folks in the session chat. If you could just drop kind of like your role and maybe the company that you're working at, or at least the size of the company that you're working at, just for context, so we can kind of take a look at that as the panel's going on. But yeah, let's kick it off with the first question. So, in general, do you have like sort of a framework for how you think about growth in the engineering space, whether it's technical growth or growth sort of in the managerial kind of domain? Zach, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't say a distinct framework one way or another. I think that a few things. The domain of software engineering has become quite complex, especially over the last 10 to 20 years. It's specialized heavily along the edges in different roles, whereas, 20 years ago, everybody was a generalist, so to speak, doing either desktop or early web software. As far as maker versus management, things really get wildly different there throughout that journey. Really, it all comes down to tech lead is a position where, typically when you're leading a small team, you're doing a little bit of both. And that's really where in your career, you're forced to make those critical decisions on which path to take or which one fulfills you. I definitely don't have like this, end all framework that applies to all companies or all situations. I think it's very contextual. And unfortunately, that's maybe a little bit of a cop out, but.
No, totally valid. Jessica, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I would echo what Zach said. I think it's really important for companies to have their own definitions of what they, Zach mentioned the split around senior engineer. You're going to generally choose either a technical track or a management track. I think it's really important to understand the technical and behavioral competencies at each level, and I think companies should provide that. How do I get to that next level? What's expected of me at that level from a behavior standpoint, and how do I get there? In providing that sort of context, because what's equal to a principal engineer? Is that a director? Is that a senior engineering manager? And understanding, can you hop between the two? I think that's really important. So for companies, I think every company is going to be different. Like Zach said, there isn't a one framework that works for all, but depending on your tech stack, depending on what space your company is in, you can define those competencies in each area and make those very clear to the folks who are joining your team.
Gotcha. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So to follow up on that kind of thread, you guys mentioned that you have this sort of probably inflection point, we can call it, maybe around senior engineer to tech lead. Do you think that it is necessary to have sort of a baseline level of like or baseline skill set level, like maybe it's senior engineer, maybe it's like just the level above that, before you head into a managerial role? How important do you think that fundamental level of like technical skill set is in kind of going on to succeed as a manager in the engineering domain specifically? Jessica, maybe you have some thoughts there?
Yeah, so I came from finance into engineering. And so I sort of came from a non-traditional background, taught myself starting on Khan Academy and code school, and then went to Tufts and BU for my master's classes. And so for me, it was, I knew I always wanted to be on the management track. I knew I didn't want to go to the principal engineer track. So I wasn't focused on becoming this superstar developer. I knew that wasn't my lane, but you need to have empathy for what the developer is going through, and what their capacity is, how you need to work as a director or as like a senior manager with product to understand your developer's capacity, their time. You need to, and I think even as like even in the agile space, an agile coach, a scrum master, I think all of those roles should have been, or at least developer adjacent. You need to have that empathy and understand what it takes to do the job in order to manage the position.
Yeah, yeah, totally. That makes sense. To have that level of empathy, you can't. It sometimes it's hard to explain coding to someone who doesn't, at least hasn't experienced that at least at a foundational level. But Zach, did you have any thoughts there to add on?
Sure. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Jessica said. I think for me, maturity, actually just like holistic maturity is the minimum bar to enter management. That tends to not happen in my experience until somebody's around 27, 28 at minimum, until you really like have started transcend that child mindset. It does carry on that long. It did for me anyways. And once you reach that level of maturity, you can start to take on the responsibilities of management seriously and in the way that you need to. I totally agree. Empathy is a critical skill for management, although I also believe that empathy is something that you can learn and that you can practice and you can get better at over time. It's definitely something that I was short on early in my career. And as I managed more and more people, it was something that I practiced and got a lot better at. Beyond that, do you need great technical skills? I agree with Jessica, you do not. Although I will say it'll probably make your life a little bit easier. Engineers like their own kind. They tend to be sarcastic and cynical, and it's a lot easier to gain their respect if you know what they're talking about. So you don't need it, but it probably will help your path be a little bit easier with some of the tough personalities that you'll encounter.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely, that resonates. Okay, so we've kind of talked a little bit about like that inflection point. Do you guys sort of have an understanding of when or how you might make the decision about whether you're more suited to the maker track versus the manager track? Like whether you want to try to go pursue becoming a staff or principal engineer at a company versus maybe a director or VP of engineering in the longer run. Zach, you might have some thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, the first question I'd ask you is, do you like people? Do you like dealing with people? Like, if the answer is no or probably not, then management is probably not the best thing to pursue at this time in your career, right? I think people, I think young engineers often hand wave away management responsibilities. Like it's sort of normal. Again, these are smart people. It seems like something that's easy, but it's way more complicated and harder than you can imagine because honestly, people are very unique. They're snowflakes. They're complex. They have emotions. They react differently. There's different archetypes of personalities. And software is incredibly simple compared to people in my opinion. Software is linear. It may seem complex, but when you compare them to people, then there's no comparison. So, people problems require emotional energy from you, right? Like, do you have enough emotional energy to give to deal with people conflicts? If you don't have a lot of that sort of emotional energy to give to other people, then maybe it's not the best thing for you. It requires empathy, as Jessica stated, patience, tact. And, you have to be willing to lose some of your technical skills over time. That doesn't mean like, oh, I'm a manager today and now I can't code anymore. I know some organizations spout that sort of advice, like, oh, you're a manager, you should never. No, I don't believe in that. I think it's a lot more gray than that. But you will lose your skills over time the longer you fully focus on management. It's just a time thing.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Jessica, what are your thoughts?
Again, I would echo what Zack said. You need to not only love people, but you need to have that emotional energy and be able to deal with others' emotional what they're going through. You need to be able to guide them through that and mentor them through that. And so from my perspective, it's not just being like good with people and liking people. I like people a lot, but sometimes, if there are multiple people dealing with some heavy stuff on one day and it's all coming to me, that's tough, right? And I hold that in my heart. I'm responsible not only for someone's career, but I'm responsible for their well-being, and that can be a lot on a given day. And So I think when you're making that decision, you have to be really honest with yourself. I think one of the things for me was making the decision to go into people management versus continuing on a technical correct track. I knew I was never going to be the best developer. That's not my bread and butter. My brain doesn't, I'm not as fast as the other developers. I could have worked and worked and worked to get there, but I know that I actually do have that bandwidth for
Hmm.
that. And sometimes it's tough. Sometimes I have days where everybody's upset. It seems like, um, and so that, but I love what I do, and I love working with people, and like Zach said, you're going to lose some of your technical skills over time. I still code on the side. I developed an app on my and so I still do that.
Hmm.
Um, but as far as the company I work for, you don't want me jumping into the code. I'm not going to be the best developer. I trust my developers to, and I listen to them. I don't come in and say, "Hey, I'm your boss. I'm going to tell you what to do from a development standpoint." I trust them. We're gonna learn together and we're gonna grow together. And I'm going to watch out for, if they say to me, "Oh, I'm having a tough time with this interpersonal, um if they're trying to decide which way to go and on the tracks, if they're having tough time with interpersonal issues and stuff like that, if they really want to go management, let's work on it. Let's like Zach said, you can build those skills, you can build empathy skills. Let's work on that. Let's get you in a place where you're feeling good enough about your technical abilities that you can advise a team without necessarily being deep in the code every day."
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And to that point, there's different levels to it. So you might be at like an entry level, then a senior engineer, then you're a tech lead, then maybe you move into an EM1, and you're at that first management layer. How and then I guess after that there's director and then sort of VP. But at those different levels, how much do you feel that folks should be actively making technical decisions? And like, I guess, what would be the scope of those technical decisions? So it might be the case that an EM1 is actually getting into the code and saying, "Hey, architect, these subcomponents this way." But maybe the director or VP have this higher level vision of like, "Hey, we're moving all of our infrastructure to this because strategically that fits in the company." Do you guys have thoughts on sort of where that dichotomy fits and what the scope of technical decisions for different management roles is? Maybe Jessica, you can kind of kick things off since you
Sure.
were, yeah,
Yeah. So I think it's different for every company, and
yeah,
it depends on the structure, and it depends on. So we're building out a separate enterprise architecture team, and
okay,
so our EMs, while they do advise technically, they're not in the code every day. Can they? Yes, they all come from deep technical expertise backgrounds, but
hmm,
that's not our expectation of them. So it depends on how your teams are structured. If you need that, if you need EMs to be in the code every day and to be coding and submitting and merging their code, like then that's what you would have that expectation lined up from the get-go. So I feel like that's kind of a cop-out answer, but it's really like it depends.
yeah, fair enough. Zach, any thoughts there?
Sure. So I think like early when you start managing, when you transcend to management, usually within an organization, right? You were, a lead or an individual contributor or maker, and you transition into a manager for the first time. I think you inherently have a lot of technical knowledge that you've built up as you've, sort of hit that milestone where you've moved into management. People are still going to rely on you for that knowledge, but, it's sort of, at first, it might seem really convenient to be able to manage people and also make those decisions, and you probably can handle it just fine. But you'll find that as you continue to grow as a manager, that starts to fall apart, and even at some point, it can completely break and blow up in your face. Whereas the point where you're so far removed from that work and you're making decisions, well, how did you feel when somebody shoved a decision down your throat that you had nothing to do with when you were developing software? You hated it, right? Nobody likes that. So I think you have to transition into this mode where you're propagating the knowledge that you have about the technology without the solutions, right? The problems come to the team no matter what. So now it's like, well, how can I help them navigate the pitfalls of what I've learned through my experience without necessarily coming in and telling them exactly what to do? And then, after you focus so much on mentoring, all of a sudden you'll see, things change. People just start solving their own problems. They come up with better solutions than you would have, or the one that you'd even came up with maybe in the meeting. Somebody might come up with something better. You're gonna be like, wow, that totally blows away what I thought. So I think it's a line to balance where you go through this transition and you're gonna make some mistakes, and that's fine. You're gonna cross some lines, and look, the thing is, look for the signals, look for the blowback from the team. You'll see it when they're ready for you to get out of there. They'll show you, there'll be signals. So look for those, read them, and adjust your role accordingly. I will say, that being said, looking at what they're doing is not included in that. So making the technical decisions is one thing, but still jumping in on code reviews and like seeing the output of the team, I still think is critical. Almost at every level that I was, all the way up to a senior director and a team of 40 to 50 engineers, I was still at least trying to understand what the output of my teams were, so that I had that knowledge so I could adjust accordingly, knowing what teams are thriving, which ones aren't, the quality of the code they're producing, and things like that. So as an observability thing, I would say do that until you just can't handle it anymore. Just don't go in there and dictate things.
Yeah, so it sounds like decentralizing the decision making down to the people who are closest to the problem is sort of like the answer there a little bit, is kind of what I'm gathering.
Always, if you have a growth mindset, you need those people to grow as you once did.
Yeah. Cool. So a little bit of a different question. So this is something that I came across in an article that I think a CTO named Charity Majors wrote, and she was talking about primary jobs versus secondary jobs, which is, I thought, this really interesting concept. You come into a role for a specific job. You are a back-end engineer. You're going to be writing API code, your ORM code, whatever that may be, setting up your databases and everything. But then there's kind of this other thing, which is secondary jobs, like things that you might be doing that might be somewhat beneficial to the team. Maybe you're writing documentation, maybe you're doing a lot of code reviews, maybe XYZ. How do you feel about the necessity of doing secondary jobs versus primary jobs? And have you found that doing your primary job is necessary but not sufficient? Maybe you need to take on some additional responsibilities to kind of move up the chain and go from entry level to senior. Do you think that is the case, or do you strictly feel that do you feel that maybe those are distractions and to just strictly focus on kind of the primary job initially? Zach, do you have some thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think, if we break apart startup versus established company here, a lot of things change really quickly. In a startup, you should work across the lines almost always. The team is small. You never have enough people to fill the holes. People who work across the lines and hit goals and get things done are invaluable in a startup. They don't have fear to learn things they don't know. They don't draw lines around the role. Oh, I only do this. People like that. If you bring those kind of behaviors into a startup, even if they were fully acceptable at an established company where you might be worried about stepping on someone's toes by doing those things, it's not going to serve you well. In all the startups I've been in, it would have sunk your upward mobility in almost every single one of them, if not all of them. In a big company, you're playing more chess here, where you're trying not to step on people's shoes. You don't know maybe all the processes and systems of all the departments, and you want to do more. But you got to be a little more careful about it. That being said, I don't know anyone in my career who has stepped up and tried to do more than it's asked of them that hasn't had upward mobility in their role. Like almost universally, people that do that grow and they go on and they do great things, whether it's management or a technical leader, whatever it is. That sort of behavior I would not say is a bad behavior in any situation, personally, for me.
Gotcha. Jessica, any additional kind of thoughts there?
Yeah, so I would say there once again, be honest with yourself, right? There are two kinds of people. There are people who are okay with staying at a certain level and being the person who punches out the JIRA tickets and get things done, but they don't necessarily have like a grand ambition to rise to the C level or VP or wherever they want to go. That's not necessarily what they want to do. They want to stay at a senior dev level or a full stack dev level. They want to have the lifestyle that goes along with that. They don't want to worry about certain things that come with the higher levels, and that's fine. We need people like that in organizations. I would say more so in more established organizations than startups. You really start making a name for yourself in getting noticed when you do take on those things that are outside your specific role. And when you do step outside your role, you also help in a startup break down those silos. And one of the things when a startup is growing really quickly is that you may have had like 4 developers on a team, and they have very siloed knowledge, and you start bringing in all these new people, and now the nodes are expanding, and so you're trying to make these connections and get all of this knowledge out there. And it's really good to have those cross-functional teams in a startup, because priorities are changing all the time. And so having people be able to say, hey, I can work on that, oh, I can help that team, or I can do that, or I'm at least maybe not I can do that right now, but I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to step up and try something new. That definitely puts people on a track to upward mobility. Or just expanding. If somebody doesn't necessarily want to rise at a certain company, but once says, hey, I want to develop my own app, you're gonna, it'll be great for you to learn React Native. If you're a back end engineer and you say, hey, I want to develop an app, well, wouldn't that be cool if you could jump on and help a couple expert React Native engineers on the app at your company, and get paid to do it, right? And not
Hmm.
have to, and not
Yeah.
spend like outside time to do it. So I think while it's fine to have folks who don't have upward mobility, that should not be penalized. I think it really does distinguish people when they sort of take on those little nuggets outside of their current area of expertise.
Gotcha. Yeah, so you guys brought up something important that I hadn't considered, which is the difference between, that startup and kind of larger enterprise. Um, a follow-up question there is, are there other things besides sort of taking on additional responsibilities outside of your defined kind of little box of roles? Are there additional things that you've noticed at, let's say, startups versus big companies that will help you level up faster in one of those environments? Are there any additional things, or is it just sort of taking those additional responsibilities on? Any thoughts, Jessica, on sort of additional things?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So especially coming from I came from a 20,000 person company to
Mm.
a company of, I think, around 100 when I joined. It's very, very different, because at a large company, your role is defined for you, and you're really not. You can try to step outside the bounds, but there might be some pushback. There's some bureaucracy. At a startup, you're really free to affect whatever you want to affect, and to jump in and learn about different areas of the company, and about different areas of not only your role but everyone else's role. And so I think startups really enable that. And if you want to grow really quickly, and you really want to, this is going to be corny because it's the title of our session, if you really want to level up
Yeah.
as both an engineer and a manager, but also like in general, if you're a very curious person who constantly wants to learn, it's a lot easier to spread those wings at a startup where roles aren't defined. You're gonna, a lot of the time, if you don't want to necessarily um, step out in like a technical way, you could step out in a managerial way, or step out into, like, for example, account management. I don't know a lot about sales, but wouldn't it help me as an engineer to deliver solutions for our sales and account managers if I went and talked to them, if I sat in on some of their calls, if I understood and had empathy for what they're going through and what they're dealing with? I think it makes you like kind of better all around.
Hmm.
And coming at a startup, you can come up with solutions that um, you kind of define your own solutions. So instead of things being defined for you and say, oh, we have this tool that does this, and we do this way, kind of like the business as usual, doing it the way it's always done. It's startups. I have found it's much more open to, hey, if you have an idea, run with it. If you have a way of doing something, or you're thinking like, hey, I could really do X to make Z better, go for it. You have that runway. And so you can really try and experiment and iterate more than you could at a company where things are much more prescriptive.
Gotcha. Any additional things to add, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, at a startup to up level, you need to leave your fear at home. So fear of uncertainty, fear of failure are two things that I think commonly will sink, a startup employee. Don't be afraid to just do things, make mistakes, and move forward. Everybody needs to sort of operate like that. I think another thing that will help you up level at a startup specifically is being able to prioritize things without external assistance. So there's always going to be 200 problems. Can you identify the 2 or 3 that are really the most burning and then jump on one of them and start solving them? People who are able to sort of cut through the meaningless problems and say no to them really makes a big difference in a startup specifically. And then we already discussed this, but you should be willing to work across the lines, right? Like you need to be able to maybe do a little design, maybe you need to do a little product management, maybe you need to do a little sales, whatever it takes. As an engineer in that scenario is what you need to do. At a bigger organization, it's basically what Jessica said. I think being able to develop influence is really big in a big organization. The more influence you can develop for yourself, the easier it is to rally people in the direction you want to take them. I think playing politics matters. That doesn't mean Game of Thrones, but what it does mean is what Jessica said: build relationships, right? Like build relationships with sales, build relationships with marketing. Get in and understand their problems. And then lastly, at a big organization, if you want to move up, hit your goals. Hit them. They're defined. They're well defined. They're prescribed. They're given to you. Hit them, exceed them, and you'll move up.
Cool. Yeah. So it sounds like there's some slight differences, but basically just pushing beyond the boundaries of like what you have there and kind of showing that you can operate at that higher level. Awesome. So I guess a question, and this can be a little bit like less defined, especially at startups potentially, and even at some bigger companies. How do you collaborate with your manager about your career path? How active of a role have you found managers tend to play? Obviously, they are at the end of the day the person who's kind of like advocating for you at the broader organization. How do you manage your sort of career path with them? What kind of conversations do you have? How do you sort of stay on the same page about where you're at, where you need to improve, where you're already doing well? Jessica.
Sure. So, my manager, I have conversations with. He's very open and saying like, "Hey, where do you want to go? Tell me where you want to go, and I'm going to help you get there." And I think that's what, and he's fantastic. And I've had those same conversations with the folks I manage, and even folks that are now skip level to me. I want to know what your goals and dreams and ambitions are for yourself and your career, and I want to know how we can get you there, and I want to know how to align you to that work that will help you get there. If I don't, I really want to foster that open environment. I think a lot of times people have kind of, in like a more traditional work environment, people kind of sit back sometimes and aren't advocating for themselves. And so I really make it a point to ask us, what do you want? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do more of? What do you want to do less of? What makes you happy? What has been the highlight of your week? What has been the low light of your week? What's currently going on? And I take notes on all of that. And so I'm constantly ruminating, where can I align this person? What work, what team, what people can I introduce them to that can help them level up? But I also want to encourage folks people won't know where you want to go unless you speak up. I got into management because I got into engineering because I told someone, I think I want to do this. And they said, cool, we're going to send you to classes. Okay. But if I just sat back and said, oh, I'm just going to type away at my computer and try to like do these things on my own and hope somebody notices me. As managers, we're juggling a lot of different things. And so we're not all, as much as we try to notice and we want to notice, we need you to be open with us and tell us what you want. And that way we can clear that path for you and we can align you to those things.
Gotcha. Yeah, so it sounds like you have to advocate for yourself along with your manager to get your manager to advocate for you. Zack, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, cold hard fact is that a startup, your manager may not be the best and most experienced manager you've ever had. And they might be a first-time manager. They may be relatively inexperienced themselves at this role. I think the number one thing to start to force is understanding, what your manager thinks of you, what their mental model of you is, and your mental model of yourself in the organization, and make sure those two things match, right? Like, so a lot of management problems I see are when those things don't match. I think that I'm better than my manager thinks, or I think I'm worse than my manager thinks. Any dissonance in that is a real problem. And it is a fundamental responsibility of a manager to not have dissonance there, but inexperienced managers are very susceptible to it. For one, they're very reluctant to deliver critical feedback to people until they get used to that and adjust to that. So the number one thing I say is, like, make sure that you force that conversation. You yourself has the power to do that. You can get it out of them just like they can get it out of you. But, really, like, where do I stand? How close am I to the next role? As Jessica said, always be open and honest about what you want and what you want to achieve and the time frame in which you want to achieve it, so the manager can tell you if that's reasonable, possible, or not. The next thing I'll say is, at a startup, your manager isn't always the best place to solicit feedback. The best feedback you're probably going to get is from your peers. That being said, if you go to your peers and ask them for feedback, for the same reason the manager might have delivered you critical feedback, they may be unlikely to give you what you really need to hear. So here's a case where you can actually collaborate with your manager and ask them to solicit that feedback from others for you, synthesize and anonymize it, and really find the things that, like, 2 or 3 people all came back to, which are probably your biggest blind spots or your growth areas. You should focus on your growth and not so much the role that you want to achieve. Although, when you're young, it seems almost impossible to do that. But if you do that, you'll grow faster. And recognize some things are completely out of managers' hands. Upward mobility in a startup is a function of growth. If the organization grows tremendously fast, like hyperscale, you'll probably get dumped into roles you had no business doing years before you had business doing them. And great, you picked a good organization where you can sort of grow faster than you normally would have. It might be a little uncomfortable at times, but if that's what you want, buckle up. Let's go. That's how you do it. So there's like some factors that you can influence your manager, but there's also external factors. And, I think the theme here is you need to own your own story. You need to own your own story, whatever that is and what you want to accomplish, and, be aggressive, advocate for yourself, and make these conversations happen if they're not. Don't wait, right? Like, as Jessica said, don't wait. Nobody's going to come do it for you.
Yeah. Cool. So we have a question from Ian Field. So what were some of the initial growing pains you encountered transitioning into management that you didn't initially consider when making that transition? So Zach, you want to talk on this?
Yeah, this is interesting. I think, when I first transitioned to management, I was pretty young. I was in my mid to late 20s. I was definitely overconfident as an archetype of engineer at the time. And I think I just completely underplayed people problems and the complexity of them and the empathy required. I think I just didn't enough ask myself, when I do this, how will it make my team feel? When I do this, how will it make this person that reports to me feel? If I promise this, can I come through with it? Just really like digging deep in all these interactions and understanding the impact of every behavior, and everything you say to the team is amplified 10x from what it was before, because you're in a position of power and authority now. You control their livelihood, and that power, it can't be understated. It is the more people you manage, the bigger it gets. And it's a really sort of trap to fall into if you don't constantly stop and check that power, be open-minded, and constantly ingest signals from people to make sure you're adjusting your approach. So I really didn't think about any of that when I started managing. I thought it was like, all right, I need to give somebody a raise here or there, tell them what they're doing good or wrong, move on with my life. It was just so much more complex than that. I as I've done it for years, it was so much more complex than I initially thought. There's this sort of loaded question, but definitely going back to just stopping to pause. What would other people think when I do this? What if I were them? Just having that mental exercise will dramatically help you early on.
Gotcha. Jessica, anything to add?
Yeah, so I would echo what Zach said, and in addition, I also found that as a new manager, I often overpromised and underdelivered because I didn't, get the input of other stakeholders. And so if an engineer came to me and said, "Hey, I want to do this thing," yeah, let's do it. This is awesome. Like I get to like empower you to do something you want to do, and it's actually going to help us. But wait, we didn't check with product, and we didn't see what on their priority list, and we didn't see, hey, this is going to touch some code that's legacy, and it might, and getting too excited to like not considering sort of all of the stakeholders and angles that we get excited about trying new work and trying new things, but we also have to temper that with what's good for the business, and what's also good for the users, and our stakeholders. Have we really like aligned with everyone? That's something I definitely didn't understand when I first got into management. Also, I love people. I will hug a stranger on the side of the road. I was not prepared for the emotional toll of being a people
Mm,
manager, and I was
yeah.
not prepared for that. That some days you're going to feel like a punching bag, because people are going to have, and it's not, people aren't intentionally treating you like a punching bag, but you're hearing what people are dealing with in their personal lives. You're
Yeah.
hearing what people are dealing with professionally. You're hearing if people are having conflicts with each other. You're dealing with you're sometimes managing up on conflicts. You're managing conflicts between an engineer and someone on a totally different team. And it's a lot to do. And so that I think I had always been branded a people person my whole life, and I think that was just such a general blanket statement. You have to really, really understand people and be able to take yourself kind of out of it at the end of the day, so that you can like enjoy your family and not be super stressed and take on all of those emotions as your own, and
Yeah.
really be able to have that like boundary.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Well, so another question from the audience, do you guys class scrum master type roles that don't have line management responsibilities as management? Um so yeah, I guess, yeah, Jessica, maybe any thoughts there? I know you've had some experience, especially on the agile side of things.
Yeah. So I do. I would classify a Scrum Master as a manager. They're an operations manager, right? At the end of the day, a Scrum Master is managing delivery. So they may not manage people, but they're managing projects. At least in my view. So I would definitely consider them management, just a different type of management.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Any thoughts there, Zach?
Not much. I just say I think that the word management was literally in quotes on this question, and I think that sort of shows how overloaded of a word it can be. I think that we should say that they have some sort of authority and that you should respect it, right? Like
Yeah.
uh, if an organization has committed to a certain project management technique, and there's people who are sort of responsible and have the authority to implement those techniques, whether it's Scrum, Kanban, or Waterfall or whatever, you should respect their authority and the process in delivering it. You may not agree with it, but you definitely should respect it. This is especially critical at a startup that's going through this sort of adolescent stage where they've added tons of people. Things are getting super messy. Of course,
Yeah.
the company's going to start implementing project management techniques because
Yeah.
you need systems when you have that many people. And there's going to be some people who just totally reject this notion. People who bring
Mm-hmm.
an authority around these systems, they're going to get backlash. This is where you should respect this authority and go along for the ride. How can I help learn how to scale these things across many people? Not, well, we did this for 3 years and it was fine. Yeah, you did it for 3 years and it was fine, but you had 15 people. You got 200
Yeah. Yeah.
work. So
Totally. There can be a dissonance between the type of people that are coming in at that early stage when it's like 5 or 10 people, and then that additional process. They didn't come to a 5 or 10 person company to like be mired in process, but it's important as you're growing. I definitely think to manage some of the chaos, not
yeah.
too crazy with it, but yeah, for sure. Okay, so I wanted to ask some specific questions around maker and manager. So on the maker side, what do you think differentiates an entry level developer from like a senior, and then senior from staff, and staff from principal? Like, what are those kind of bands, and is it really all technical stuff that's making the difference between those levels, or are there different things that are starting to emerge when you're going from like senior to staff or staff to principal? Jessica, you want to have any thoughts there?
Sure. So I think they're from junior level or associate level engineer
Mhm.
to senior engineer. There needs to be awareness for, especially if you're sort of understanding what work you're doing and you're being expected, you're within like an agile format and you're being expected to say, hey, I think this is going to take me 6 months. I think this is going to take me 6 days, 6 hours, whatever the estimate may be. Hopefully not 6 months. Um, but you need to really understand how you work. You need to understand your your velocities, and I think that's something as a new developer you don't necessarily know yet because you're still learning a new code base. You're kind of understanding how everything sort of fits together. I think if you get to as you get to a senior level, you're going to be someone who at that company or anywhere else has a slower has a quicker ramp up time to any type of code base and can kind of understand, okay, even though I don't agree with it, this is why the legacy code is the way it is, and I can kind of dig in and advise others, and I can be that mentor, and I can sort of I can sort of manage up to an engineering manager. I would think that at a senior level you should be able to do that and say, hey, you'd be more responsible for estimates of work overall, and say, I hear that our stakeholders are prioritizing this piece of work, but it looks like this piece of work is actually going to be less effort and could be a quick win for us. At a senior level, I would expect that you'd start having those conversations and be able to be a part of those conversations. When you move into a principal and staff engineer, this is when you're driving enterprise architecture. This is when you have sort of seen it. I don't want to see seen it all, but you've seen enough with the systems overall and how the software this, a particular company is developed that you can onboard really quickly, and you can come in and start making those advisory decisions about, hey, we need to pull this portion of this code out and create a microservice and do that in a judicious way. And you need to understand overall best code practices. You need to understand how you're testing in a certain environment. You need to understand the depth and breadth of what's happening in the department, and be able to advise on everything. Whereas
Mhm.
a junior level engineer just coming in would take more direction. At a principal level, you're really expected to kind of influence the overall direction.
Right, right. Zach, do you want to pick up from there?
Sure. Yeah, I think from entry level to senior for me is mostly about speed of delivering quality solutions and the autonomy in which you're able to do that. Right. Entry levels can't deliver quality solutions with high autonomy generally, unless they're like some sort of prodigy, and they tend to be more of a drain on their team. Right. Like until you get ramped up. Like, let's face it, they're gonna ask a lot of questions and distract people who are doing lots of work. As you become senior, you can bang out work without asking tons of questions autonomously, and you could rip things off your team's to-do list and get them done pretty quickly. So I think that really starts to break down after senior. It's not like when you're a staff engineer, you can rip 3 times as many tasks off the board and get them done as a senior engineer. That sort of that everything changes after that. To me, it becomes more of a mind shift change. You're no longer thinking about your work directly, the code that you're writing as your output, but like your influence and how you make everybody else deliver faster is really what it starts coming down to. And there's a number of ways you can accomplish that, and it really depends on the organization. But aligning closer with product management to make sure that the work we're doing is the right work, and that you kick back any complexity and you negotiate with them. Providing customer support to the engineering team. Essentially, they have a lot of questions about complex things. You as a staff engineer should know and be able to navigate the code base in your head better than most people, meaning like without going and researching it, you could be like, oh, well, this module over here does this and this and that, so this won't work and that won't work. And you just save somebody like 2 days of research, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing where you're actually force multiplying the impact you're having on the organization, you're able to 10x the work the org is doing, not because you're doing it, but because you're enabling everybody else to do it better. It could also be like writing abstractions or reusable things that you've noticed are patterns and providing those to engineers so that they can move more quickly. So there's lots of ways to accomplish it. The commonality here is it's a mindset change. Instead of like my work that I deliver and the code that I write is better, it's more like, how do I make everybody else better? And how do I find the things to do that have the most impact on everybody else's work? Rank them like that instead of like what might have to push a metric on the product or something.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a change from basically, moving the bricks yourself to like it's trying to build leverage so you can move a ton of bricks and like the entire team can move like a lot more together than just the sum of the individual pieces. One more technical sort of question, and then we'll dive into a little bit more managerial stuff. What approaches have you personally taken to level up your technical skill set and become that faster kind of senior engineer type person? Did you have to do a lot of project work on the side and outside of work in order to level up faster? Or did you exclusively look at building your technical skill set through the lens of work and the stuff that you're approaching at work? It can sometimes be variable for people. Zach, do you want to pick up there?
Sure. Yeah, I think you need a breadth of problems to solve, right? You need lots of practice and you need to practice on different things, right? That's how you learn. Your first year or two in software engineering, you probably don't need to look anywhere but your job for that breadth that completely overwhelms you, right? You're brand new. Maybe you're working in e-commerce, whatever. You're not gonna go home and code. You're gonna be burnt. You're gonna go home and be like, "Whoo, I survived another day." All right.
Yeah.
But after that, there are things you're going to need to do if you do want to grow fast. So I think changing domains exposes you to different problems. So if you're working in e-commerce, go work in SaaS, go work in mobile. Jumping across sort of back end to front end to mobile to machine learning, those kinds of transitions will also greatly advance and grow your knowledge. You can do this in side projects. You could hop jobs. There are different ways to accomplish this. All I know is that practicing lots of different things will make you stronger. If you practice the same thing until you feel complacent, it's not going to make you stronger, right? I used to do this analogy. Are your hands moving faster than your brain, or is your brain moving faster than your hands? Meaning like, all right, I know I need to create these 32 classes to complete this ticket, and I know everything I need to do, and I just have to sit here bored as hell writing it? Or are you sitting there like, what do I do next? Well, there's the growth moment right there. It's when you're like that. So how often do you find yourself like that? If not often, seek elsewhere.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good metric. Cool. I guess one sort of small follow-up question on that. Do you feel like you have to go visit a lot of fundamentals, CS fundamentals like computer systems, algorithms, networking, and all of those kinds of concepts in order to really move up from senior to, let's say, staff, principal, or are those things not as high leverage as potentially just doing some other kinds of work? Zach, maybe you have some thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, I think many years ago, you did absolutely always need the fundamentals, understand how a computer works, from electrical signals all the way up to, code that you're writing, whether it's, low-level code, assembly, C, or some of the higher level languages that we use today. I don't think that's true anymore. I think it depends. Maybe like if you want to be a staff backend engineer, then you probably still need strong CS fundamentals to succeed at that job. If you want to be a staff machine learning engineer and you've just been doing a lot of data science and machine learning your whole career, that's probably fine. You probably don't need to know how electrical signals travel through the computer or the GPU to accomplish what you know and all that you've known, because we live in a world of so many layers of abstractions all the way down to the bare hardware these days. So I don't think it matters as much as it used to, although I will say I'm sort of a technologist. I've always been, so I am a little biased. I do like engineers who understand things top to bottom. I do find them to be generally stronger, able to cross lines and do things across technology stacks and things like that more effortlessly. I don't think it's required, though.
Gotcha, for sure. Jessica, anything to add?
Yeah, I would I would definitely echo that. I also wanted to answer the previous question, since I didn't get to talk about that. I think
Oh,
it's
sorry,
really,
my
no,
bad.
that's okay. So I think Zach had talked about doing um, a sort of like coding when you get home versus like if you're coming in as a junior engineer and you're like, you're already overwhelmed. Um, I would definitely agree with that and say, as much as you can focus on leveling up at work, you're getting what you need at work when you first start. I was pulled from finance to go to engineering. And so I was learning it in the day, but they were also requiring me to get my master's at night in computer science. And so I
Mm-hmm.
was learning at a different pace during the day than I was at night. And
I
it
see.
led to a lot of that, what Zach was talking about, a lot of that like cognitive dissonance where I was, kind of
Yeah.
like looping around, and I wasn't learning one thing at a time, and I wasn't really getting all of that experience. Let your brain take a break
Mm-hmm.
because as you grow and as you like as you go up whichever path you decide to take, you're going to you're going to eventually get to a point where you're going to have to um, sort of dip into things outside of work time, because you're going to want, if you want to rise, you're going to have your mind thinking about a different breadth of area. um
Yeah.
so yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Um. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So this is a good transition into the manager kind of path. So this question is related to managing people who are more technically skilled than you. So as a startup co-founder, I'm more of a jack of all trades, but when building a team, looking for masters in their respective fields, how would you handle those relationships? Jessica, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts since I
Okay.
manage a team of people that are much more skilled than I am. So I think listen, right? That's be a good listener and understand you hired these folks for a reason, because you consider them masters, you consider them experts. Listen to them, partner with them. If you're hiring them for the expertise in that specific area, feel free to ask questions. Like I ask questions, hey, why are we doing this way? Why are we doing that way? But from a place of curiosity, not from a place of I know better than you, because I know I don't. I think one of the best things you can do is I think Jay mentioned that they're a startup founder. I think you have to you have to hire for the skills that you don't have, and you have to understand where your limits are, and be okay with deferring to someone who knows more than you in that area. I 100% I will make suggestions, or I will ask questions, and then I'll say to my engineers, I consider you an expert in that area. You were hired to be an expert in that area. Go do your thing, my friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. Zach, any additional thoughts?
No, that's a pretty great answer. I think just being clear, like, though, I think the only thing she didn't say is being clear with them, like, okay, I don't know as much as you, and telling them that and making sure that you state that, I think is
Yeah.
important because it'll help reinforce the notion of where they think of themselves as you. And I just wanted a plus one to ask questions. I think you should know enough to ask great questions, but you don't need to know any more than that. You should know
Yeah.
just enough to ask great questions, get the explanation from the team as to what they're doing and why, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's some accountability, and that's the only loop you really need.
Yeah, 100%. I think that helps build a lot of trust when people are self-aware, everyone knows kind of where they're at and what their strengths and weaknesses are. Cool. So some more questions on the manager path. When you're earlier in your career, maybe entry level, maybe senior, what kinds of things can you do to set yourself up to move into a managerial role? And what kind of skill sets should you be thinking about building while you're kind of earlier in your career, if that's your aspiration? Zach, you want to pick up there?
Sure. I'd say the number one thing you can do is to lead. Leadership is not management, and leadership is free. You can just do it at any role, at any job, at anywhere you're working with other people, period, you can lead. And
Mm-hmm.
there's almost always leadership gaps somewhere in teams and organizations and departments. They're going to be everywhere. So everybody I've seen that just started organically leading before they were asked, whether that's helping the team organize their Jira board or something as simple as that, all the way up to identifying big problems and prioritizing them, that's going to set you up for management, because you're going to be the first person's name that comes up in consideration when a role comes up, because you've already shown yourself capable of identifying and solving problems with other people.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Jessica, you want to maybe pick up?
Yeah, I would just hit the little 100 emoji to what
Oh
Zach
yeah,
had just said.
100%. Yeah.
I think leadership is not in a title. Leadership does not necessarily correlate with a certain title, and you shouldn't see like manager in a title and think, well, I'm just gonna sit back and not lead because I don't have there's a difference between like influence, authority, accountability. You can take on that accountability for something. You can offer like Zach said, hey, if you see a Jira board is kind of a mess, or like the backlog is like 3 years old, offer to go in with your EM and say, hey, you know what, I'd really like to clean this up. I think it would really help the team, and I'd like to get some insight on why some of these tickets are hanging around and how we can have better backlog health and really help the team move more quickly in delivering user value. Cool.
Mhm.
You've now identified yourself as someone who seeks out those problems and can identify a problem, and you're also bringing solutions. I'm going to help. Here's how I think, I've identified the issue, I've identified why we want to solve it, and I'm offering to help out with it and learn from you.
Yeah.
That puts you on really a fast track, and it also lets people know that you're willing to sometimes dive into something you might not know a whole heck of a lot of about, but you want to better yourself and you want to gain that knowledge and rise. um be vocal about it. Don't just sit in the background and kind of go through the Jira tickets and say, oh, all right, maybe I'll delete this one, or maybe I'll go talk to this person about this, or this. Be
Yeah.
loud about it. And so
Yeah.
say, hey, this needs doing, and I want to help do it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think those are fantastic answers, and I think that's a perfect place to end. I wanted to first of all thank you guys for both showing up. This has been a really, really helpful conversation for me. Personally, just I'm a little bit earlier in my career, so this was a super helpful conversation, and I'm hoping other folks, got a lot out of it as well. I think Haley is just joining in, so I think we're gonna